All right, hello and welcome back. So in this video, I want to talk about suffering. Now, we have the Buddha, right, Siddhartha Gautama, and he has gone out of his palace and he saw death and suffering. And now he has labeled that as bad. Okay, so he saw suffering and he said life is suffering. And it's very clear through this whole philosophy of Buddhism, or I guess religion, depending on who you're talking to, that suffering is not good. That is why we want the happy experience of nirvana, which is to no longer exist. Now, my question is why we have decided that suffering is a negative thing. And now, this seems like a weird question as a Christian, because again, remember, you're viewing suffering through Christian eyes. Why do we think this is bad? Well, as a believer, we ground suffering and we ground it and say, well, God created a perfect world. He loves us. He created Adam and Eve in the garden, and it was perfect. There was no sin. There was no suffering. There was no lack. And God just walked with people in perfect relationship, and everything was perfect. And then where did suffering come from? It came from the original sin. You know, they ate off of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that brought in suffering into the world, because now what have we done? We have engaged in a lack of good, and that has brought about bad things. Okay, so I can ground suffering and I can say, I know suffering is an evil thing and death is an evil thing because it is not the intention of God for those things to exist. So when I say at some point in the future, God will return or I will go to heaven and all things will be remade new, there will not be suffering because it will be good. Now, on Buddhism, we don't have any of that. But Siddhartha Gautama has rightfully said suffering is not a good thing. We want to get away from it. But where is the philosophical ground for that? Why is suffering even a bad thing? And the correct answer, and one correct answer is, well, he saw it and he knew it objectively to be evil. He saw it and he, like all people internally, we just know that is not supposed to be the case. And I think that this is broadly true for everyone in every religion. You know, short of those who are in Christ and really truly are in Christ, people go to bed, they put their head on their pillow at night and they know something is wrong. Something is not the way it is supposed to be in the world. And I think, and I'm getting a little bit off topic, I think this is where you get Marxism and communism and all of these sort of utopian ideas too, because I think rightly people assume that there is supposed to be a state of perfection that we should be in. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in this life and this world. I think when Jesus comes back, he will make all things perfect again. But the utopian is under the correct assumption that something is wrong and they need to remake the system and make it back into the state of perfection. And they just have, you know, false beliefs about how that utopia comes into play and comes back into existence and when it comes into existence, not in this life. Okay, so they're putting heaven, essentially utopia, in this world as opposed to the next one. We'll come back to Siddhartha. He has correctly, like all other people, come to the conclusion that suffering is some form of evil and it shouldn't exist. But why? Because the universe has no personhood. It has nothing to say about morality. And so the universe does, you can't ground this evil and suffering in the universe. The universe is just a bunch of dust and stars and gas. Okay, so where does the suffering come from? Where do we ground it? How do we define it? And so basically what's happening here is Siddhartha looked at it and he goes, I feel it's bad. And very quickly, this devolves again into relativism. And what I can say is, well, I'm actually from an island where everybody truly, truly believes inside their hearts, suffering's actually really good, you know? And actually, we all want death. And not even just death, not death in nirvana where we go to some happy place. No, we like to suffer, and we suffer just brutally for fun because it's the greatest thing. And we help each other suffer. You know, I go over to my neighbor's house and, you know, I take a switch and I just start beating him and he thanks me. This is the opinion that I have. Why is Siddhartha Gautama's view that suffering is bad better than, you know, the weird people from my imaginary island in this possible world? And there is no ground for suffering here. Why is suffering evil? We don't know. And if it was grounded in one of the gods of Buddhism, who has chosen not to go to nirvana and has stayed. Okay, well, why do all of those gods or one of those gods believe that? Because we know they were just people. So where do we ultimately get this system where suffering is bad? It does not seem to be the case that there is any place to ground it. It is just assumed. And again, we have another layer of the religion just sort of floating in thin air without any real reason to believe that it's true. We're just sort of assuming it's true. Zach, any further thoughts or comments on that?
No, no, I don't think that the the lack of a grounding is something that they've ever thought about, and I don't know how much it would bother them.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about our own understanding of our position within the grand the tapestry of religions, or um
I'm talking to a
or
robot right now.
we're talking to we're talking to anyone who's got a Western understanding of things.
Yes.
As soon as you start poking on those issues, you'll find that the give really starts to bother them.
Yes.
And then I don't know how that would affect someone who strictly adheres to this
Sure.
belief system, though, especially from Eastern culture.
Yes. And again, this is the logical approach. So this is going to be primarily for the edification of the believer, you and anybody watching this. Secondly, it is giving us different tools that we have access to if the right moment approaches to use them. It is not to say that you should use each or every one of these when talking to someone that's Buddhist or pantheist, but they are questions. If you're talking to a Western Buddhist or pantheist, these might be super effective. And that's been my experience. Zach, I think you stepped out, but I had a student, Christina, in the apologetics class I taught at the church. And she grew up in the Christian church, and she grew up in the school, a Christian academy from K through 12, clearly had a logical Western worldview, and her entire family was Buddhist. And she actually started coming and driving way out of her way to come to these classes. And these were the types of things we were talking about when we went through weeks and weeks of Buddhism. And that was really helpful for her. So again, it's going to depend. These are just tools. You have to apply them in the moment. And that's the hard part. And that's why we have that whole course on evangelism, which gives you time to think and respond in a way that's caring and also truthful. So yeah, I totally agree. I do not know how these specific objections would appeal if you are in Asia, for example, with people who did not grow up in Western sort of logical culture. So with that, that brings us to the end of this video, and we will see you in the next one. God bless.